My name is Emily Carter. I am 28 years old, a software engineer, and I never imagined that my life would turn into the kind of story you would expect to see in a courtroom drama. But that day in Chicago, as I pushed the heavy wooden doors open and stepped inside on crutches, every eye turned to me as though I were a ghost. The sound of my crutches echoed against the marble floor, each step a defiance against everything that had been stolen from me. The hook came not from me, but from my father. The moment he saw me, his face drained of color. His lips parted, his voice breaking into a shout that cut through the silence of the courtroom. "Oh my God, it's her." For a man who never showed emotion, that single outburst was enough to make the entire room freeze. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. Before I continue, let me say this. If stories like this draw you in, if you find yourself torn between anger and disbelief, make sure to like this video, leave a comment about what you would have done in my place, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of my journey. That moment was seared into my memory not because of what my father said, but because of what it revealed. My family, sitting confidently in their seats, believed they had buried me long ago. They thought I would never rise from the hospital bed they left me in, never speak against them, never fight back. Yet there I was, standing in front of them, alive and determined to tell the truth. The gasps from the gallery, the shifting of chairs, the whispers spreading like wildfire, those sounds told me everything. They had been certain they would never see me again. You might wonder how it feels to face the people who tried to erase you, the people who should have loved you most. Imagine walking into a room where every face belongs to someone who once claimed to be your family, but now they look at you like an enemy, terrified not of what you are, but of what you know. Would you have had the strength to walk in there, or would you have stayed away, letting them keep their illusion of victory? For me, there was no choice. My crutches may have slowed me down, but they became the rhythm of defiance, echoing through the courtroom. Every step forward was a reminder to my sister that she had not won, to my parents that their betrayal had not broken me, and to myself that I had survived. The shock on their faces was only the beginning. Because what they didn't realize was that I had come armed with more than just determination. I carried secrets they thought would never see the light of day. And in that courtroom, under the weight of their stares and the judgment of the law, the truth was finally about to unravel. It had all started months earlier, far from the marble walls of the courthouse, on a day I believed would be the proudest of my life. I still remember the chill of the Manhattan wind brushing against my face as I stood outside the towering glass building, the weight of a leather folder pressed tightly against my chest. My fingers trembled around it as though it were more fragile than glass, yet what it held was stronger than steel. $10 million. My algorithm, my vision, my sacrifice, all captured in ink and signature. It was the moment I had spent years clawing toward, and now it was real. Inside that folder was the proof of every night I had stayed awake while others slept, every time I had written and rewritten code until the sun came up, every sacrifice I had made while my peers went out to live the carefree life I secretly envied. I had chosen work over rest, ambition over comfort, and now that choice had crystallized into a contract with one of the largest healthcare corporations in America. My AI program was about to change the landscape of diagnostics, and the world would finally know my name. As I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the cold February air, my heart raced. I wanted to run, to scream, to laugh, to cry, all at once. Instead, I walked quickly to my car, clutching the folder as though someone might try to snatch it from me. I drove out of the city, the contract beside me on the passenger seat, my mind racing ahead to the moment I would share the news. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine what it might feel like to see my parents proud. I pictured their faces, the way their eyes might light up, perhaps even the rare embrace I had longed for since childhood. And my sister Victoria, older by 4 years, polished and confident, maybe even she would smile at me. Maybe for once she would see me as more than the awkward younger sibling constantly trailing behind her shadow. The road stretched endlessly between Manhattan and the quiet suburb outside Boston where our family home still stood. As the miles blurred, I rehearsed the words I would say. I thought of walking into the kitchen, holding up the contract, and declaring, I did it. I made it. I thought of the silence breaking into cheers, of my father nodding in approval, of my mother rushing to hug me, of Victoria maybe patting my shoulder with something like respect. But deep inside, beneath the layer of hope, there was a trembling doubt. Memories of years when nothing I did seemed enough pressed against me. The science fair where I won first prize, but my mother praised Victoria's artwork instead. The scholarship I earned, brushed aside while my father boasted of Victoria's promotion. Still, I told myself this was different. This was $10 million. This was undeniable. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, tall and dignified, with its white columns and trimmed hedges. I sat in the car for a moment, my chest tight, my palms damp against the folder. This was supposed to be my triumph. I told myself to breathe, to be strong, to hold on to that spark of hope just a little longer. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. Victoria was at the kitchen table, her laptop open, her hair perfectly styled as always. She looked up as I entered, her eyes narrowing before I even spoke. I did it, I said, my voice shaky with excitement. I held the contract high, unable to hide my grin. $10 million. My algorithm has been signed. For a heartbeat, I expected her to smile, to share in my joy. Instead, her lips curled, not into pride, but into something sharp and cruel. Your algorithm? She snapped. Her voice was like ice water poured over my skin. You mean the one I shepherded through boardrooms? The one I made credible? Without me, it never would have seen the light of day. I froze, the air draining from my lungs. I tried to laugh it off, to insist she was wrong, that every line of code was mine, that the sleepless nights had been mine alone. But her eyes blazed with something darker than competition. This was not a sister staking her claim in jest. This was rage. She pushed her chair back abruptly, the scrape against the floor cutting through the air. She stood, her presence towering over me, her face set in a mask of contempt. You think you're better than me, she hissed. You think this makes you superior. My hands shook as I clutched the contract tighter. This isn't about you, Victoria, I whispered. This is about the work, about what it can do. It's mine. But she was no longer listening. The hope I had carried all the way from Manhattan crumbled with each word that left her lips. The sister I had thought might finally share in my pride now stared at me as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in her path. In that moment, I knew something had shifted. The triumph I had dreamed of, the validation I had longed for, had been twisted into something else entirely. What should have been the proudest day of my life had become the spark of something far more dangerous. And as I stood in that kitchen, my contract trembling in my hands, I could feel the storm gathering around me. A storm that would not stop until it had torn apart everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and trust. That storm would reach its breaking point sooner than I could have ever imagined, and it would begin with a single, devastating fall. The argument escalated faster than I could have imagined. One moment I was clutching the contract in my hands, my voice trembling as I tried to defend myself, and the next my sister's fury was filling every corner of the house. Victoria's words cut into me, each syllable sharpened by years of resentment I had never fully understood. Her eyes glowed with something dangerous, and the air between us felt heavy, charged with a storm I could not control. I tried to reason with her, my voice shaking but desperate. I told her the code was mine, that every late night and every sleepless morning belonged to me, that the algorithm had come from my mind and my heart, not hers. But instead of calming her, my words poured gasoline on the fire. She stepped closer, her chin tilted, her presence overwhelming. You're nothing without me, she spat, her face inches from mine. Her words struck deeper than the sharpest blade, because a part of me had always feared they might be true. We were standing at the top of the staircase now, the wooden banister pressing into my palm as I tried to steady myself. My chest heaved, my hands damp with sweat, the contract trembling between my fingers. I remember thinking for a brief moment that I should walk away, that I should leave her there with her anger and come back another time when the heat of her rage had cooled. But I didn't. Something inside me wanted her to see me, to finally acknowledge that I was more than a shadow. Her voice dropped into a hiss, raw and venomous. This was supposed to be mine. You stole it. Before I could respond, before I could even take a breath, her hands were on my shoulders. It was not a gentle shove, not a stumble born of accident. It was forceful, deliberate, filled with the kind of intent that sends a chill down your spine even as it happens. The world tilted beneath me. My foot slipped on the polished wood, the banister slid away from my grasp, and then gravity claimed me. I remember the sickening sound of my body colliding with the stairs, the crack of my skull against the edge, the sharp burst of pain that spread through my leg. The world spun into a blur of colors and shapes before darkness closed in. When I opened my eyes again, the world was different. Harsh white light burned above me. A rhythmic beeping pulsed somewhere near my head. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled my lungs, and a weight pressed heavily across my chest and leg. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache, every nerve raw and screaming. A nurse leaned over me, her face kind yet startled. "You're awake," she whispered, almost as though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. My throat was dry, my voice a weak croak. "How long?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering with something unspoken. 2 weeks, she said softly. "You've been in a coma for 2 weeks." The words hung in the air like smoke. 2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks when my life had teetered on the edge, when the world outside had continued without me, and when I had been helpless, trapped in darkness. The first thought that burst into my mind was my family, my parents, my sister. Surely they had been here, sitting by my bed, waiting for me to open my eyes. I tried to ask, the words catching in my throat. The nurse's expression shifted. She looked away, her lips pressing together. "No one's been here," she admitted. Her voice was quiet, apologetic, but each word landed like a blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, a crushing weight replacing it. I asked again, as if repeating the question might change the answer. "My parents? My sister?" The nurse's eyes softened with pity. "They called once, early on, but they haven't visited." The room spun in a different way now, not from injury, but from betrayal. I had expected Victoria to stay away after what she had done, but my parents? Even in my darkest moments, I had believed they would stand by me, that some part of their love for me would break through. Instead, they had abandoned me, left me alone to drift between life and death. The pain in my leg and the pounding in my head were nothing compared to the ache that spread through my chest. I felt smaller than I ever had, like a child reaching out for comfort that would never come. I lay there in silence, staring at the ceiling tiles, listening to the steady beep of the machines that had kept me alive while my family turned their backs. Each sound felt like a cruel reminder that I was alive, but not because of them, not because they cared, only because my body had refused to give up. It was in that hollow space, in that sterile room filled with machines instead of love, that I began to realize the truth. My sister hadn't just pushed me down the stairs. She had pushed me out of the life I had thought was mine, out of the illusion of a family that would stand beside me. And my parents had let her. I could not yet see the full scope of what she was planning. I didn't know the depth of the lies or the lengths she would go to erase me completely. All I knew was that the fracture in my body was nothing compared to the fracture in my heart. And as the nurse adjusted the monitors beside me and whispered that I should rest, I closed my eyes again, not because I wanted sleep, but because I could not bear the weight of the silence that confirmed I had truly been abandoned. That silence, I would soon learn, was only the beginning. What came next would prove that my sister's betrayal was not an isolated act of rage, but the first move in a much darker game. The days after waking blurred together, each one heavy with silence. The machines that had once been a lifeline now felt like a cruel reminder of how alone I was. Nurses came and went, their kindness a thin comfort, but the faces I longed for never appeared. My parents did not come through the door with flowers or worried expressions. My sister did not sit beside me with apologies or explanations. The only visitors I had were strangers in scrubs, and every time the door opened, I hoped and prayed that it would be someone from my family. But the door would close again, and I would be left staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done to deserve such abandonment. The nurse who first told me the truth repeated it gently when I asked again, as though maybe I had misheard. No one had been there. My parents had called once early on, but when the nurse mentioned their words, My chest tightened until I thought it might shatter. They said I brought this on myself. They said I had embarrassed them. My own parents, who should have fought for me, who should have prayed for me, had turned their backs. I replayed every memory of trying to win their approval. I saw my father's disapproving gaze at the dinner table whenever I mentioned my work, his cold silence when I spoke of ambition. I heard my mother's voice praising Victoria for her charm, her polish, her ability to command a room. I remembered moments when I had begged for them to see me, to recognize the effort I was pouring into something that mattered. Yet in the moment when my life hung in the balance, they had dismissed me as a shameful inconvenience. The walls of the hospital room began to feel like a cage. I lay there in the glow of fluorescent light, unable to escape the weight of betrayal. The pain in my leg was sharp, but the pain in my chest was unbearable. It was not the kind of pain medicine could soothe. It was the hollow ache of realizing that the people I thought would never leave me had chosen to do exactly that. Nights were the hardest. I would listen to the distant sounds of footsteps in the hall, the occasional voice, and imagine that maybe they were finally coming. Maybe the door would open, and my mother would rush in with tears on her cheeks, or my father would sit in the chair beside me, pretending to read the paper, but refusing to leave my side. The door always stayed closed. I drifted in and out of restless dreams, haunted by the image of Victoria's face as she pushed me, the twisted smile that had told me everything I needed to know. Then, one morning, the door opened, and she was there. Victoria. My heart leapt for a moment, stupidly hopeful, but the look in her eyes killed that spark instantly. She stood at the foot of my bed, her arms crossed, her smirk cruel. "Still clinging to life, huh?" she said, her voice laced with venom. I forced myself to meet her gaze, even though every part of me wanted to shrink away. "Why are you here?" I asked, my throat tight, my voice barely a whisper. She leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Just making sure you stay out of my way." She straightened and walked out, her heels clicking against the tile, the sound echoing in my chest long after she was gone. She had not come to check on me, not to comfort me, not even to gloat openly. She had come to warn me. Her words weren't just cruel taunts. They were a promise that she was already moving forward, and that my survival was nothing more than an inconvenience she would soon correct. I clenched the sheets in my fists, anger burning hotter than the pain in my body. I had been left behind by my parents, and now my sister had returned only to remind me that she intended to erase me completely. But there was something in her tone, something in the way she said it, that told me she was hiding more. She was not simply reveling in my weakness. She was covering her tracks, protecting a secret I had yet to uncover. The betrayal of my family, the silence of my parents, and the venom of my sister could have broken me. But as I lay in that hospital bed, I felt something else rising in me. Anger, determination, a voice deep inside whispering that if they thought I would disappear quietly, they had underestimated me. I did not yet know the full extent of Victoria's plan. I did not yet understand the depth of what she had already taken from me. But I could feel it in my bones that this was only the beginning. And as the days dragged on, as loneliness pressed harder against me, I began to realize that surviving the fall was not the end of my fight. It was the beginning of a war I never asked for but could no longer avoid. Because the truth was, my sister had not only tried to push me down those stairs, she was already working to bury me in ways far worse than broken bones and bruises. And soon, I would learn just how far she was willing to go. The first person who managed to break through the wall of isolation around me was Samantha. She had been my closest friend since college, a person who knew me better than anyone else, someone I trusted, even when I couldn't trust my own family. When she slipped quietly into my hospital room one gray afternoon, I almost didn't recognize her at first. Her face was drawn tight with worry, her eyes scanning me as if she had expected to find a ghost instead of a living person. She rushed to my side and carefully wrapped her arms around me, mindful of the IV lines and the stiffness of my injuries. For a moment, the tears I had been holding back for days burned in my eyes, but her presence gave me enough strength to keep them from spilling over. "I've been fighting to see you," she whispered, her voice low. "The hospital kept turning me away. They said only family could visit." Family. The word stabbed deeper than any wound in my body. I wanted to laugh at the irony, to scream at the injustice of being abandoned by the very people who claimed me as theirs. But Samantha was here, and that meant I wasn't completely alone. She sat in the chair beside my bed, leaned close, and her next words made my stomach twist. Emily, I need to tell you something. Victoria has been talking at work. She's been telling people the contract is hers, that she's the one who created your algorithm. She's acting like you never existed. The room tilted around me. My body was weak, but rage surged through my veins with a force stronger than any painkiller. My algorithm, the very thing that had consumed my life, was being stolen in plain sight. It wasn't enough for her to push me down the stairs. It wasn't enough for her to leave me in a coma. She was rewriting history while I lay helpless. That night, long after Samantha had left, I reached for my phone with trembling fingers. The simple act of holding it felt monumental, but I needed to reclaim some sense of control. I logged into my bank account, praying there would be enough to cover the mountain of hospital bills piling up. Instead, a red notice blinked on the screen. Account frozen. My chest tightened. I dialed the bank, my voice unsteady as I forced the words out. The representative on the other end sounded calm, almost mechanical as she explained. A court order has restricted your funds due to concerns about your ability to manage them. Ability. The word echoed in my head, sour and cruel. I had just clawed my way back from a coma, barely able to stand, and someone had decided I was incompetent. Someone was trying to paint me as unfit to handle my own life. The next morning, a man I had never seen before walked into my room. He was in his 30s, tall with sharp eyes that scanned every detail of me as if cataloging evidence. He introduced himself as Daniel Reed, an attorney. The seriousness of his tone made my pulse quicken. He set a leather folder on my lap and slid papers out of it. "I'm here about your contract," he said. My hands shook as I flipped through the documents. They were official, stamped, and notarized, declaring that I was legally incapacitated and unable to manage my affairs. At the bottom of the page was my signature, flowing neatly across the line. Except it wasn't mine. "I never signed this," I whispered, my voice cracking. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Someone is trying to take everything from you. These documents were filed with the court to transfer your $10 million deal to your sister." The walls seemed to close in on me. I could hear Victoria's voice in my head, mocking me, reminding me to stay out of her way. This was her work, calculated and cold. As if to confirm the nightmare, Dr. Helen Price, the physician who had overseen my recovery, arrived later that afternoon. She sat at my bedside, her expression firm but kind. She pulled up my medical records on a tablet and turned the screen toward me. "These entries were altered after you were admitted," she explained, her finger pointing at the glaring inconsistencies. Notes claiming extended sedation, exaggerated neurological impairment, details that don't match your actual condition. Someone wanted to make it look like you would never wake up. The realization hit me harder than the fall down the stairs. Victoria hadn't just tried to harm me physically. She was orchestrating a plan to erase me completely, not only from my contract, but from my very identity. She wanted the world to believe I was incapable, that I had been broken beyond repair, and she was using forged records to prove it. I sat there, the hospital bed suddenly feeling like a prison cell, my body aching but my mind sharpening. The betrayal of my family had already hollowed me out, but now I understood that I wasn't simply abandoned. I was being systematically destroyed. Victoria thought she had won, that I would stay quiet, that I would let her take everything I had built. But as Daniel looked me in the eye and promised to help, and as Dr. Price vowed to document every falsified note in my chart, a fire ignited in me. If my sister wanted me erased, she was about to learn that I was far stronger than she ever believed. And I knew this was no longer just about money or contracts. This was about my life, my identity, and my fight to reclaim what was mine. What I didn't know then was that stepping out of that hospital would set into motion a chain of events that would expose just how deep her deception ran. And the first step toward uncovering it all would begin with a meeting I arranged, a meeting where I would stare my sister in the face and make her reveal the truth herself. The hospital walls had begun to suffocate me. Every beep of the machines and every shadow cast across the ceiling reminded me that I was no longer safe within my own life. I knew if I stayed there, I would be swallowed by my sister's lies, erased by paperwork and doctored records that told a story of incompetence I knew was not mine. Against every warning, against the nurse's insistence that my body wasn't ready, I signed myself out. Pain stabbed with every movement, but anger gave me the strength to ignore it. I was no longer just recovering. I was preparing for war. The first step was to confront her, not with fists or screams, but with the truth caught on tape. I arranged to meet Victoria at a cafe in downtown Boston, a quiet place with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the street. I slipped a small recorder into the pocket of my coat, my heart hammering as I walked through the door on unsteady legs. She was already there, poised and elegant, sipping her coffee as though she had not left me for dead. "You're up," she said the moment her eyes met mine, her tone dripping with mockery. "Didn't think you'd make it." I forced a smile, sliding into the chair opposite her, pretending to match her composure. "I just wanted to check in about work," I said casually, though my hand shook beneath the table. She leaned back, her smirk widening. "The contract's moving forward. Someone had to take over since you were indisposed." Every word was a knife, but I kept my expression calm. "You mean my contract?" Her laugh was sharp and cruel. "It's mine now. You weren't going to make it happen from a hospital bed." I clenched my jaw, the recorder in my pocket catching every syllable, every admission. She believed she had already buried me. She didn't realize that with a single conversation, she had just handed me the weapon I needed. Later that night, back in the small apartment I was renting while I healed, Daniel introduced me to a private investigator he trusted. Her name was Rachel Torres, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She spread a series of bank statements across the table, her voice steady and precise. "Your sister has been making payments," she said, tapping a finger against one of the documents. "Large sums wired to a colleague at your company. $10,000 here, another 15 there. He's been forging documents to make it appear as though she was the lead on your algorithm." My breath caught. It wasn't just her words and arrogance. Victoria was paying people to rewrite history, to strip my name from my own creation. My blood boiled as Rachel continued. "This isn't just jealousy. It's deliberate fraud. She's building a case to show that you never existed in this process." Before I could even process the horror of it, my phone buzzed. It was Samantha, her voice urgent when I answered. "Emily, you need to see this right now." She forwarded me a chain of internal company emails, and as I opened them, my hands shook with fury. One email from Victoria to our boss read, "With Emily out, I'll be stepping in to replace her. The contract is in good hands." Another spoke of her vision for the algorithm, as if my sleepless nights and my breakthroughs had never happened. I read each line, my stomach twisting tighter, my mind reeling. It was not only a theft of credit, it was an erasure of identity. By then, the evidence was piling up, but I needed more. I needed to know how she had gotten the power to freeze my accounts, to file those forged documents, to alter my medical records. I called the hospital administrator, demanding answers. Her voice was brisk, her tone cautious, but after a pause, she admitted what I had suspected. "We found unauthorized changes in your medical file, entries added to exaggerate your condition, suggesting you would be incapacitated for months. Only a handful of staff had access, but we're also investigating an external request that came through legal channels." My heart pounded as the pieces clicked together. Victoria hadn't acted alone. She had manipulated the system, pulled strings, and used connections to paint me as permanently broken. It wasn't enough for her to steal my contract. She wanted me buried in a false narrative of frailty, locked away by the weight of lies so no one would ever question her claim. I stared down at the papers spread across the table, the emails glowing on my phone, the recording device heavy in my pocket. I felt weak, my body still bruised and fractured, but my spirit burned with a fire I had never known before. My sister thought she could erase me. She thought she could turn me into a ghost, haunting the edges of my own success. But she had underestimated me. As Daniel gathered the documents and Rachel promised to dig deeper, I knew this was only the beginning. We had enough to fight back, to take her to court, to show the world what she had done. Yet I also knew that stepping into that courtroom would not just be a battle of evidence and law. It would mean standing face to face with the very people who had abandoned me, who had chosen her over me, who had left me to die. And as I lay in bed that night, the city lights flickering through the window, I understood that the fight was no longer about money. It was about survival, truth, and justice. The courtroom loomed ahead of me like a storm on the horizon, and I knew that when the trial began, everything would come to light. Rachel returned a week later, her eyes sharper than before, a thick folder tucked under her arm. I had been pacing the small apartment all morning, my injured leg protesting every step, but my mind too restless to sit still. When she spread the documents across my table, my stomach dropped. Bank transfers, dates, signatures, all leading back to Victoria. "She's been paying people to keep her story alive," Rachel said firmly, pointing to a name I recognized immediately. Mark. He had been a colleague of mine, a man always eager to curry favor with Victoria. According to the statements, he had received more than $10,000 from her account. "What did he do for the money?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He forged company records," Rachel replied. "He's been altering project files to show her as the lead. Meetings, proposals, even timestamps on the algorithm's development. It's all being rewritten to center her." The words stung like acid. She wasn't satisfied with pushing me down the stairs. She was buying a new past, crafting a history where I never mattered, where she alone was the genius. I barely had time to process before my phone buzzed. It was Samantha, her voice tight with urgency. "Emily, I found something else. I just forwarded you a chain of internal emails." My hands shook as I opened them. Line after line, Victoria's words jumped off the screen. "With Emily out, I'll be stepping in to replace her. The contract is in good hands." Another message bragged about her vision for the algorithm, as if my years of sacrifice had never existed. She wasn't only stealing credit. She was erasing me from memory, positioning herself as the savior of the company. I leaned back, my breath shallow. My mind raced through every late night, every moment of doubt I had fought through, every shred of myself I had poured into my work. To see her claim it as hers was like watching my soul being ripped away. But the lies didn't stop at the company. I needed to know how she had managed to twist my medical reality, how the court had believed so quickly that I was incapable. I called the hospital administration and demanded a meeting. The administrator, a woman in her 50s with clipped speech and weary eyes, met me in a quiet office. She pulled my file up on her computer, scrolling through notes I had already seen. Then she showed me the additions: prolonged sedation, severe neurological impairment, permanent incapacity. "These entries don't match your actual progress," she admitted. "They were added after your admission. We are investigating, but it looks like someone with legal authority requested the changes." The room seemed to tilt. Legal authority. Victoria had found a way to twist the system itself to her advantage. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. I left the hospital that day with the file heavy in my hands and the truth heavier still in my chest. My sister wasn't just ambitious. She was ruthless. And my parents, who should have been horrified, had stood by silently, allowing it all to happen. Their silence was its own betrayal, an approval without words. I went home and sat at the table surrounded by evidence. The bank statements, the emails, the altered medical records, the recording from the cafe. All of it formed a web, and at the center of that web was Victoria. She had always been controlling, always hungry for approval, but now I understood she would burn down anyone in her path, even her own sister. As I stared at the growing pile of proof, memories of childhood rushed back with brutal clarity. The time she snatched my doll and our parents praised her for being assertive. The countless times she painted me as the problem when we argued. The vacations where she made every decision and I was told to stop complaining. It had all been leading here, to this moment where her dominance wasn't confined to family dinners, but stretched into my career, my identity, my very existence. I clenched my fists, the pain in my leg flaring but drowned by a surge of determination. For years, I had tried to prove my worth to them, to show I was enough, to earn even a scrap of recognition. But looking at the lies she had spun, I realized there was nothing left to win from them. They would never see me. They had chosen her, as they always had. The fight ahead was no longer about their approval. It was about survival. It was about reclaiming what was mine, about proving to the world, and maybe even to myself, that I was not a shadow to be erased. Daniel believed we had a strong case. Rachel promised to keep digging. Samantha stood by me like a shield, ready to testify to the truth. For the first time since the fall, I felt like I wasn't alone. But I also knew the hardest part was yet to come, because building a case meant walking back into court, standing face to face with the people who had betrayed me, and forcing the truth into the light. And as the date of the trial drew closer, I could feel the storm gathering again, heavier and darker than ever before. The courthouse loomed above me, its stone facade as cold and unyielding as the people I was about to face inside. My crutches clicked against the pavement as I made my way up the steps, each sound echoing louder than it should have, each step a reminder that my body still carried the scars of what had been done to me. My palms were slick against the handles, not from pain, but from the weight of what was about to unfold. This was not just another hearing. This was the moment when every secret, every lie, and every betrayal would be dragged into the light. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers and shifting bodies. The air felt heavy with anticipation. I sat beside Daniel, my lawyer, who exuded a calm I couldn't match. His eyes were sharp, his posture steady, as though he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Across the room sat my family. My sister Victoria with her perfect hair and practiced expression of indignation. My parents seated stiffly behind her, their eyes carefully avoiding mine, as if looking at me might expose the truth they had tried so hard to ignore. The judge entered, her robe sweeping the floor, her gaze cutting through the noise and pulling the room into silence. Daniel rose to speak, his voice steady and commanding. Your Honor, we present undeniable evidence of a conspiracy to defraud my client, Emily Carter. The words struck like thunder, reverberating through my chest. I glanced at Victoria, watching the flicker in her eyes, the tightening of her jaw. She was composed on the outside, but I knew the cracks were already forming. Daniel began with the recording. The sound of Victoria's voice filled the courtroom, her tone dripping with arrogance as she declared, "It's mine now. You weren't going to make it happen from a hospital bed." Gasps rippled through the gallery. I felt my stomach twist, but also a flicker of vindication. Her own words were the weapon she had handed me, and now they were cutting her down in front of everyone. Next came the financial records Rachel had uncovered. Transfers of large sums to Mark, the colleague who had helped her forge company documents. Each page was laid before the judge, each number an indictment. Victoria sat rigid, her lips pressed thin, while Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sweat glistening at his temples. Then the emails appeared on the screen. Messages in which Victoria bragged about her vision for the algorithm, claiming credit for every step of its creation, positioning herself as the mastermind while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. Reading her words aloud in the sterile light of the courtroom was like exposing rot beneath polished marble. The gallery erupted in murmurs, the sound of disbelief spreading like wildfire. But the most damning moment came when Dr. Helen Price took the stand. She adjusted her glasses, her voice calm and unwavering, as she explained the falsified entries in my medical records. These additions exaggerated Miss Carter's condition, she said firmly. They were designed to suggest she would never recover, thereby justifying the court order stripping her of her rights. She held up the charts, pointing to every fabricated note, every lie woven into the story of my supposed incapacity. The judge's expression hardened. I could see the weight of the evidence sinking in, each piece tightening the noose around my sister's carefully spun web. Victoria finally rose to defend herself. Her voice was sharp, her words rehearsed. I was protecting the company. Emily was unstable, unfit to lead. Someone had to step in before everything collapsed. She glanced at my parents as though seeking their silent approval, but neither of them met her eyes. The judge's gaze was cold as ice. "Do you have proof of her instability?" she asked. Victoria faltered. Her words stumbled, her confidence waning. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across her face. Mark was called next. His voice shook as he tried to defend his actions. "I was just following orders," he muttered, his eyes darting everywhere but toward me. It was a pitiful excuse, and the judge's frown deepened with every stammered word. I sat there, my chest tight, my mind spinning, but a sense of power I hadn't felt in months surged inside me. For so long I had been silent, erased, abandoned. But here, in this courtroom, the truth was finally roaring louder than their lies. My parents sat frozen, their faces pale, their silence damning. My mother's hands clutched the edge of her seat, her lips trembling, while my father stared straight ahead, his usual cold composure cracking at the edges. They could not deny what they had heard, what they had seen laid out before them in black and white. Their years of favoritism, their complicity in Victoria's schemes, were now visible to everyone. When Daniel rested our case, he leaned toward me, his voice low but certain. "We've built something solid. The truth is on our side." I nodded, though my heart still pounded in my chest. The evidence was strong, but the weight of facing my family, of being forced to relive every betrayal in front of strangers, pressed down on me. I knew this was not the end. The hardest part was still coming, because soon it would be my turn to take the stand, and I would have to look my sister in the eye, face my parents' silence, and tell the world what had been done to me. The day of the verdict felt heavier than any day before it. I barely slept the night before, the weight of every memory pressing down on me. The fall down the stairs, the coldness of my parents' rejection, Victoria's smirk in the hospital room, all of it replayed in my head as I stared at the ceiling, waiting for morning to come. When it finally did, I forced myself upright, leaned on my crutches, and prepared to face the people who had tried to erase me one last time. The courtroom was thick with silence when I entered, the kind that presses against your skin and makes every breath feel louder than it should. My parents sat in the gallery, pale and rigid, their eyes carefully avoiding mine. Victoria sat at the defense table, her composure faltering as the walls closed in on her. Mark slouched beside her, his face drawn with the weight of a decision he could no longer undo. I felt their stares prick my skin, but I kept my chin up. I had survived worse than this moment. When the judge finally entered and took her seat, the hush was absolute. She leafed through her notes with deliberate care, her face unreadable. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every second felt like a year. Then she spoke. "The evidence presented in this case is overwhelming." Her voice was clear, steady, and final. She looked directly at Victoria. "The defendant orchestrated a calculated scheme to defraud Emily Carter of her intellectual property and financial rights." The words struck like lightning. I saw Victoria flinch, the last of her practiced arrogance crumbling in real time. "For fraud and conspiracy," the judge continued, "this court sentences Victoria Carter to 4 years in prison. Additionally, she is ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $200,000 to the plaintiff." The gallery gasped. My mother clutched my father's arm, her lips trembling as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. My father's shoulders sagged, the stoic mask he had worn for years finally cracking under the weight of disgrace. The judge turned her gaze to Mark, who stared at the floor like a child caught in a lie. "For your role in forging company records, you are sentenced to 2 years in prison and fined $20,000. Mark's face collapsed into his hands. The reality of his choices had finally caught up to him, and there was no escaping the punishment. Then came the part that made my chest tighten. "As for Mr. and Mrs. Carter," the judge said, her tone heavy with disapproval, "your involvement in enabling this scheme, your silence in the face of fraud and abuse, cannot be ignored. This court finds you liable in civil proceedings and orders damages of $75,000 to be paid to the plaintiff." The sound of my mother's sobbing filled the room, muffled against my father's shoulder. My father stared ahead, his face hollow, his power stripped away by the very court he thought would never touch him. For years, they had treated me like an afterthought, but here in this courtroom, the truth had judged them both. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the crutches. Relief coursed through me, but it wasn't the kind that brought joy. It was a release, a long, shuddering breath after being held underwater for too long. I had fought for this moment, clawed my way through betrayal and abandonment, and finally the world saw the truth. Yet even in victory, the pain lingered. My sister was being led away, her wrists bound, her eyes dark with fury. Mark shuffled beside her, his head bowed in shame. My parents sat in silence, their reputations shattered, their pride destroyed. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt hollow. Justice had been served, yes, but nothing could erase the scars they had carved into me. The gavel struck once more, sealing the judgment. People began to rise, gathering their belongings, whispering about the scandal they had just witnessed. But I stayed seated, watching my family unravel piece by piece. For so long, I had been the forgotten one, the one pushed aside, the one left to fend for herself. Now they were the ones crumbling under the weight of their own choices. As the room emptied, Daniel leaned toward me. "You did it," he said quietly. His voice carried pride, but also respect. He had seen me at my weakest, and now he saw me standing tall again, even if leaning on crutches. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat ached with the words I could not form. I had won back my contract, my name, my dignity. But part of me still grieved for the family I had lost long before the trial ever began. I stood slowly, my legs trembling but steady enough to carry me out. The bright Chicago sky met me outside the courthouse, wide and endless, a reminder that the world was still there, waiting for me. For the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of freedom. But freedom was not enough. Winning in court had given me back what was mine, but it had also left me with a choice. I could disappear into the silence, rebuild my life in private, or I could take what had nearly destroyed me and turn it into something greater. As the crowd dispersed and the doors of the courthouse closed behind me, I realized that my fight was not only for myself anymore. The scars I carried, the betrayal I endured, had given me something far stronger than pain. They had given me purpose, and that purpose would shape the next chapter of my life in ways my family never could have imagined. When the courthouse doors closed behind me for the final time, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Silence, yes, but not the heavy silence of abandonment or betrayal. This was a silence filled with possibility. The weight of my family's lies no longer pressed against my chest. The shadow of their judgment no longer followed me. For the first time, I was free. I moved into a small apartment in Boston, a modest place with wide windows that overlooked the city. The walls were bare, but to me, they felt like a canvas waiting to be filled. Each morning, sunlight spilled across the floor, and I reminded myself that I could choose how my life would look now. No more chasing after scraps of approval from people who had never truly seen me. No more waiting for validation from a family that had long ago decided I was unworthy. Cutting ties with them was not easy, but it was necessary. I realized that freedom does not come from winning someone's love who refuses to give it. Freedom comes from walking away and knowing you are still whole without them. My sister was serving her sentence, my parents were facing the consequences of their silence, and I had my life back. But what mattered most was not the punishment they received. What mattered was the lesson I carried forward. Pain can destroy you if you let it, but it can also shape you into someone stronger. Betrayal can hollow you out, but it can also clear space for resilience to grow. I used part of my settlement money to start a foundation in San Francisco dedicated to victims of family abuse and betrayal. Legal aid, counseling, safe housing. I wanted to offer others the very things I had needed when I lay in that hospital bed alone. Standing at the launch event, looking out at faces filled with hope, I spoke the words I had once needed to hear. You are not alone, and you are more than what was done to you. Looking back, I no longer see my story as one of loss. I see it as proof that even in the darkest chapters, there is a chance to rise. My sister tried to erase me. My parents abandoned me. But their actions forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. That strength is mine to keep, and it will carry me through every challenge ahead. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You do not need anyone's permission to be worthy. You do not need anyone's approval to know your value. And when life tears you apart, remember that you can build yourself back, piece by piece, into something even stronger. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, leave a comment, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And now I want to ask you, if you were in my place, would you have chosen forgiveness? Or would you have walked away the way I did?